Welcome, friends, to another edition of Journey of Adventurous Discovery, the podcast for Christians exploring living from Christ within. I'm your host, Bret Wade, and today we have a guest, but not just any guest. Frank Viola is a conference speaker, blogger, and best-selling author. He helps serious followers of Jesus know their Lord more deeply so that they can experience real transformation and make a lasting impact. Viola's blog, frankviola.com, frankviola.org, is regularly ranked in the top 5 of all Christian blogs on the web. And his podcast, Christ is All, reached #1 in Canada and #2 in the US on Apple Podcasts. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today, Frank. Your writing and speaking have had a tremendous impact on my journey. So,
Amen.
welcome to the podcast and glad to have you here with us today. Frank, your expertise is greatly valued. As a speaker, you have many event opportunities. I would be honored to learn, and this was my contact to you recently
Mhm.
to set this podcast up, to learn the 7 questions you use as a guide before accepting an invitation. I believe others would benefit from this knowledge
Mhm.
as well. Could you
Mhm.
kindly share those with us, please?
Yes. Yes, I think I mentioned it on another show,
You
but
did. Mhm.
when I'm given an opportunity or an invitation, either one, I run it through a grid comprised of 7 questions. Now, I've developed these over the years. I wish I had this 5, 10, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20. I used to take just about every invitation that came my way. If it fell in my lap, I said yes to it. And the result was I was on the road a lot.
Mhm.
But also, as I look back, I realized that a lot of those opportunities did not have the kind of impact I had expected them to have, or I wasn't smart enough to ask the right questions before I said yes to the invite.
Mhm.
Or I should say, I wasn't wise enough because you learn this stuff through experience.
Right.
And I came to the place, Bret, where I realized that I could speak to thousands of people without leaving my house through the podcast. One of the podcasts, I have the Insurgence podcast and the Christ is All podcast. And both of those reach thousands of people every single week all over the world. And I realized that if I'm going to, go away from my family, get in go into an airplane or an airport, then an airplane, and travel, it had better be an opportunity that I'm not going to regret. And so I developed these 7 questions, and here they are. And I'll give you the categories, and then I'll give you the actual questions. So the first category is spiritual, the second is stress, the third is impact, the fourth is mission, the fifth is cost, the sixth is passion, and the last one is obligation. Okay?
Okay.
All right, so I'll start with spiritual. The question is, do I have a sense of life and peace about it? In other words, do I sense the Holy Spirit's leading to say yes? And one of the ways that we navigate whether or not the Lord is speaking to us is just not the only way, but it's one of the ways is if we have the life and the peace. This comes from Romans 8, and I wrote about it in a book entitled Jesus Speaks with Leonard Sweet. The first part of the book is mostly Leonard, and the second part of the book is mostly me, and it's very practical on how you can actually hear and recognize the Lord's voice. And it's very different from what we hear most of the time,
Right.
but it works, and it's valuable. It's what I've learned from experience. So that's the first one. Do I sense peace and life uh, as I consider the question? Is this the Spirit leading me? The second question I ask is it going to increase or decrease stress in my life? So that's a factor involved. The third factor is impact. Will it lead to making a large impact or a small impact? Let me give you a clear-eyed example. If I'm being invited to speak to a group of people in a home and there's only 10 adults in that home, in that meeting, versus I'm going to speak to 500 people in a conference, well, the impact is going to be different. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to say no to the 10 people in the home. All right.
Right.
I don't make the decision based on any one of these things. It's a combination, but it's a factor for sure. The next one is mission. Will it move the needle in fulfilling my life's mission? And I'm able to answer this because I'm very clear on my life's mission. I did the work to find that out, to discover that. And I have a whole course called Prolific.
Mhm.
If people are interested, it teaches you how to discern what your life's mission is. So I have to look at that and ask, is the invitation going to move the needle in my life's mission? Let me give you an example. There are ministries that are really geared toward a demographic of Christians that attend um, liturgical church services uh, and say they're mostly from the ages of 65 and up. All right. Well, let's say a church invited me, say it was maybe a Catholic church or an Orthodox church or an Anglican church, Episcopal church that had that demographic, and they invite me to speak to this group, 65 and up. Well, that doesn't really align with my mission,
Mm.
right? Now, there's certainly many people that would fit that mission that, it's within the wheelhouse of what their calling is, but that's not my calling. So that would be a factor. Another one is cost. Is it worth it? Let me put it this way. Is it worth my time in dollars? Now, time is a limited commodity. It's a limited resource. Once you use it, you can't get it back. It's gone, right? So time is extremely valuable. And what I do every year is I look at my yearly income and then I divide it in a way where I calculate how much an hour of my time is worth in dollars.
Mm.
Okay. So I know what that is. I'm looking at it right now. So then I have to look at the time it's going to take me, from the moment I have to prepare to the moment I leave the house, drive to the airport, get on a plane, if I am flying. Sometimes I can drive depending on how far it is, how much time I'm going to be away. Then I come back, and usually when I return from a trip, it's a whole day of decompression. I can't really do much
Oh yeah,
in terms
definitely.
of work, right? I'm losing work on those days because when I am traveling and speaking, for example, I'm not working. So I have to look at the time. Okay, how much is all that going to cost? Is this worth it? So that's just one. Again, it's just one element. It's not all of it. It's not the whole thing, but it's one. Another one is passion. Is my internal response? Is my internal response, heck yes? Or is it something less enthusiastic? Well, maybe. And there are some invitations that I have had, and it's like, heck yes. There's others that I'm not sure, right? And then the final one, and I have made decisions solely based on this one, Brett. I can think of two. It's obligation. Do I feel a personal obligation to the person or persons who invited me? Okay. So, what I do is I run the opportunity or the invitation through the 7 question grid. And again, I don't weigh it on just one of them. I put them all together because I do think the Spirit leads in conjunction with a lot of these things. I don't believe I'm going to have life and peace if the invitation is way outside my mission. Then again, sometimes the Lord does things very surprising. And I have been in situations where I didn't think it was going to yield much, but it was good that I went because I met one person that has become a longtime friend. And I had no way of knowing that that would happen. See, so there are always those situations and cases, but that's my 7 question grid, sir. You have it. There it is.
All right, I'll have to get the transcription of this and write all those out for myself. I tell you, when I was traveling quite a bit. It hasn't been recent, but over the years, and I had to weigh every one of those factors, and you know, I thought, well, what is this going to cost me with time with my children?
Right.
And that was, you know, I was thinking while you were talking about the time involved, and
Hmm.
you know, the thing that I kind of surmised years ago, it takes me about a year to, or excuse me, a week to prepare, a week to be there if it's a, you know, an extended conference or something like that, and then it's, for me it would be a week to recover. So you know,
Okay.
3 days, you know, because I had a lot of other things going on as well. And
Hmm.
I tell you what, it's just been good just to unload some of the busy stuff and be able to say, okay, what specifically am I to be doing? And the one of the things that I looked at years ago for myself when I was going through transformation. I pastored for 25 years. I've been in ministry since actively since I was 30 years old. And so looking back on all that, when I started coming out of my pastoral role, one of the things that I noticed was I was moving from what was general to what was specific to my life. And I think one of the things that really that we can get in a trap of is doing things in a general sense because we have that invitation.
Hmm.
And I get a lot of that on social media. And, you know, people still think that I'm in that kind of a role and that kind of a mindset. But when I'm looking at it, I'm saying, okay, what lends itself to me being able to fulfill my purpose, the vision that I carry, or am I going to go there with no passion and just kind of wish I hadn't been there? And I guess you know, it makes a difference. And especially today when we have so much access to digital down, or what do you call it, streaming and listening to podcasts, watching videos online. And it really makes a difference today versus when I was doing a lot of this traveling. I didn't have the access to the internet so much
Hmm.
at the time. I mean, things have changed so much just in a very short period of time for us. And but you mentioned your podcast on the Insurgents, and so
Hmm.
would you tell us about the Insurgents Experience Mastermind? Or I'm sorry, let me ask this first, and then we'll lead into that. Could you say a few words about your landmark book, Insurgents: Reclaiming the Gospel of the Kingdom, that you based that podcast on?
Yes, yes. So that has been called my signature work. It is all about the explosive gospel of the kingdom. This was the gospel that Jesus preached. It's the one that John the Baptist preached before him. And it is also the message that all the apostles preached. Evangelist Philip preached it, and Paul of Tarsus preached it too. And there's a lot of confusion about that, but I clear it up in the book. It is the most powerful message in the entire New Testament. It is rarely preached today. We hear bits and pieces of it, but the totality of it has been lost to us, and that's why I wrote the book. The gospel of the kingdom, and I'll just sum it up by saying this: it is a gospel that transcends the two main gospels we have on the planet today in Christianity. That is the gospel of legalism and the gospel of libertinism. The gospel of legalism says, God's holy or not, try harder. The gospel of libertinism says, God's love, so it doesn't really matter what you do with your life and how you live. And so the legalist lives as if he or she is God to everyone else,
Mhm.
even though they can't keep the standards and they know that internally, they invert that feeling and project onto others that same defeat, and they harshly judge them. And it's really hypocritical. All legalists are hypocrites. The Pharisees are exhibit A during Jesus' time. The libertine lives as if God doesn't even exist. They believe in God, but in terms of their lifestyle, he doesn't exist. So those are the two pervasive gospels in the Christian world today. The gospel of the kingdom, which is also the gospel of grace, by the way,
Mm.
uh, blows the soot out of both, and it transcends both, and it's more explosive uh, uh, than both. And what I argue in the book is that if we look at radical Islam, and when I wrote the book, radical Islam was on the rise. It was penetrating American culture. You had Americans, even Christians, being converted over to Islam, whether they were true converts or not. That's true converts to Jesus, I mean, or not. That's an irrelevant question. I was just saying that, people who attended church, they said the prayer, they believed in Jesus, they appeared to be Christian. Some of them were switching sides, so to speak, and becoming radicalized. That's the word. And then it kind of died down after ISIS was all but defeated. Well, now it's in the news again. You have Hamas, you have Hezbollah, and it's creating all kinds of problems, not only in the Middle East, but all over the world. And so I take that as a metaphor to say that the early Christians, the first century Christians, were radicalized
Mm.
to the world's true Lord. And that means that their entire life, their passion, their drive, their reason for living was Christ and the believing community, the ecclesia. And the same devotion that radical terrorists have to their false cause um, was similar to the devotion that the early Christians had to Jesus Christ and the believing community, the kingdom community, the ecclesia. Today, that's hard to find. You can take the average Christian, look at their life, look at their devotion, and compare it to the devotion and allegiance that a Islamic terrorist has to their cause. The Islamic terrorists, they're sold out even more. Now, I'm not talking about the violence and all that. I'm talking about the level of devotion and allegiance, right? So something obviously is wrong with the Western gospel. And so the insurgents is a term that I have used to describe what the gospel of the kingdom is and the recovering of that gospel. And I have a lot of people who read my book catalog, particularly some older books, which were about radical church restoration way back in 2008 and 2009. Unfortunately, a lot of those people who were jazzed about those books haven't gone on to read the more recent books, particularly Insurgence, which is more radical than those other books, more timely because it's for the time in which we live, and it's for every Christian, no matter what kind of church structure you're in, doesn't matter. So thankfully, lots of pastors are reading it. Lots of people in all different kinds of churches are reading it and have been transformed, and the responses have been remarkable. But we created a podcast out of it called the Insurgence Podcast, and I have conversation partners where we discuss various elements about the gospel of the kingdom, various aspects of it. And right now, what we're doing, Bret, is we're going through every reference to the kingdom of God in the New Testament chronologically. We're taking every single one of them and we're discussing it. The late Michael Heiser was one of my conversation partners on the show. We did several episodes together, and all of my conversation partners are excellent, and the conversations are wonderful. One thing I want to say here, I don't know how many people are going to be listening to this show, but my reach, although it's greater than the average podcaster, it's greater than the average uh, author. All right, many of my books have been bestsellers. The podcasts combined have almost 3 million downloads. But in comparison to a lot of my peers, um, who are, I guess you'd say they're celebrities, which I have tried very hard to work against, and have gone over backwards not to be a celebrity. The reason why so many Christians today have not heard of some of the books I've written, Hang On, Let Go, for example, Insurgence, for example, even the two podcasts, as successful as they have been, is because I don't pay for Facebook ads. I don't pay for Instagram ads. I don't pay for TikTok ads. I'm not even on TikTok. I don't pay for social media advertising. And the way to get tons of people, all right, mega, uh, a quintillion, I don't know, tons of people to listen or to read your work, you have to pay an obscene amount of money in social media ads. But I refuse to play that game. I have never played that game. And therefore, we rely on word of mouth.
Mhm.
So, the people, say, in your orbit who are your friends, Bret, people who are listening to this show, people who read my books, the only way other Christians are going to hear about it is if you say to them, listen, you have to read this book or you have to listen to this podcast. And I say that with the same, I say that deliberately with that kind of enthusiasm because unless a person is enthusiastic and passionate when they recommend something, people are not going to pay attention to it. If you tell me, hey, you got to listen to this Woogie Doogie podcast that just came out, it's pretty good, I'm not going to pay attention to it. But if you say to me, wait a minute, this thing changed my life, it
Yeah.
radically altered me, you got to hear it, then I'm going to go check it out. So, and I say that with the understanding that, if you recommend something, be honest.
Mm.
Obviously, you don't want to hype something up, but if it's genuinely changed your life,
Right.
then I rely on that word of mouth, and that's all in the Lord's hands. But I just have to say that because I just receive emails from people, usually it's Christians in their 30s, which is a big part of my target audience. Some of them are pastors, and they say things like, I'd never heard of your work before.
Mm.
I can't believe it. This has done such a remarkable thing in my life, how God has used it. I've never heard of any of this. I haven't heard of you or your work. And the reason is I don't pay for social media ads. That's the
Mhm.
reason.
Well, that seems to be where everybody's at these days. I'm maneuvering through that myself right now. One of the things that we're talking about recommending from people who had their life changed, I remember um, pagan Christianity was on the book table at the church because I insisted. And I think the report that I got was I was the only pastor in Huntsville that would dare put it out there.
Mhm.
And so, of course, we had the companion books with it as well. But being the kind of person that challenges things, and I was going through the awakening of something's wrong here. What is wrong about a lot of the things that I've been taught,
Mhm.
and coming back around to what was the life of Christ and what we're supposed to live. And I realized that a lot of people they've been taught more of a cultural, I don't know if I want to call it that, maybe a church culture and its ways rather than in more of a religious sense than really understanding the ways of God, his ways and his purposes. And it makes such a difference when you really understand that and and you're able to apply it to your life in such a way that you know that you're not in the legalism. For me, it was not in the legalism anymore. And know that you've not slipped over to libertinism. And some of the teachings that you have on that have just really just you know they really came home to me when I read them and made a big difference. So tell us now about your Insurgence Experience Mastermind for Kingdom Leaders. Who is it for, and how is it different from a cohort?
Yeah, that's a great question. All right. So if you're a pastor listening to this, or you're a teacher, maybe you're a Bible teacher, maybe you're a traveling teacher, you're a lead pastor, assistant pastor, youth minister, someone who may be a missionary or a church planter or your Bible college professor, anybody that regularly teaches and or preaches. That's who this is for, okay? And it is a intensive mastermind. We have two kinds. We have one that's all Facebook, so you don't have to leave your house, but we have another one, which is the premium one, and that's a 4-day intensive. And I would just say that it's not a cohort. Cohorts are typically focused on intellectual learning. They're very
Mhm.
time consuming. They don't have a clear goal. And I have yet to hear somebody say this cohort changed my life. On the other hand, people who have been through the leaders who have been through the insurgence experience regularly say how it profoundly wrecked them, profoundly changed their lives. Um, the focus is spiritual. The focus is very practical, like we talked about. I give lots of practical handles. Uncommon and enduring spiritual renewal is one of the focuses. And these leaders, many of them are lead pastors, some of very large churches. They have confessed that they have never been exposed to some of the things that we did. And we do a lot of practical things together, assignments, spiritual assignments. And some of these guys, they have doctorates in theology or they have DMins.
Mhm.
Yeah, and in their all their seminary training, they have not come across so many of the things that we do and explore. It's made a tremendous difference in their lives. So that's all I'll say about it. People can check into it more if they go to ministrymind.org. That was the old name for it. This is totally different now. But if they go to Ministry Mind, all one word, ministrymind.org, and wait for it to redirect, it will take you to the Insurgence Experience Mastermind page. You could see photographs of some of the people who've been through it. You could read testimonials. You could get a good feel of what it is and what it isn't. And then the main thing is you've got to apply, which will only take you 2 or 3 minutes, okay? Possibly 1 minute. But if you don't apply, you will not be invited. That's the only way we invite people. You have to apply. So, yeah, thanks for asking me that. I appreciate it.
You've also just finished a book, Project of Monolithic Proportions. I remember reading the progress reports in your email that it took quite some time to complete. You said it
Mhm.
comes out in 2025. Please talk about this project with us.
Okay, so this is a book entitled The Untold Story of the New Testament Church, Revised and Expanded. Now, the reason why it's revised and expanded is because way back in 2005, I released the pre-incarnation. It was the first book I was ever published with. I had a publishing contract from a genuine publisher, signed me. And I wrote it in a hurry. And back then, when I was doing the research in 2004 for it, I had a very limited library and access to books by scholars and New Testament professors and theologians and so forth. And a lot of those books weren't written at the time because, this is 20 years later.
Right.
And so what ended up happening was I wrote it in a flurry. The editing that was done on it was not very good. And so it's a very flawed work in many ways, the old version. And I guess I look at it as kind of like a high school
Mm.
uh, term paper, where this new version would be like a doctorate
Right.
thesis.
Right.
Although it's not for intellectuals, okay? It's written very simply. Any Christian can read it. If you just read fiction books, you'll get a lot out of it. But what it does is it tells the story of the first century church all the way from Pentecost to Patmos. And there's some discussion on Jesus, his ministry, and so forth that preceded that, but it puts it all in chronological order. It's almost like you got put into a spaceship and you were sent back to century one, and you were actually watching everything unfold from the ministry of Jesus to the day of Pentecost to the disciples in the first century in Jerusalem, to the church in Jerusalem, and then how it's dispersed into Antioch of Syria. Then you have Paul of Tarsus, his confrontation with Jesus on the road to Damascus, and then his apostolic ministry. And you get to see the background to all the letters in the New Testament, beginning with Galatians and then on all the way to the book of Revelation. And they're all there in chronological order. But more than that, you have the backstory. It's like a run, it's almost like a novel, but it's not, it's nonfiction. But you're reading it as if it's a novel. You're following the story, and then it'll say, stop. And here's the book of Galatians. Paul writes Galatians right here. You've already met the Galatians. You know who they are. You know where Paul is when he writes it. You know the date. You know what the issues Paul is dealing with. You know how he's feeling. And when you read that letter, Galatians, it opens up, and it sings like a beautiful bird. It rings like a bell. It's so clear. And then you go on and you continue the story, and then Paul writes his next epistle, First Thessalonians. See, the letters that we have in the New Testament are not in chronological order. They
Right.
were put together in the second century by length. Romans is the first letter of Paul because it's so long. It's the longest one. And then on, all the way down to little bitty Philemon. And so what this book does, it's a revolutionary look at the New Testament. I had four top shelf scholars, actually with a fifth added. So I've had five top shelf New Testament scholars as my historical advisors to go through the book and give me feedback and to make sure it was accurate. And I'll tell you what, it's just revolutionary for me. I got to see things in the New Testament I never noticed before, never saw, never understood. And my editor who read it made the comment, this is an epic masterpiece,
Mhm.
which, is, I mean, I don't know if she's just being nice or, but it's it's 4 or 5 times larger than the original edition. It's much longer, much more detail, but it's an easy read. So I tried to strike that balance between writing so an intellectual Christian who's a scholar can appreciate it, but also for someone who only reads fiction and doesn't really care for footnotes, they'll understand it too. So that was a hard balance to strike, but I think we ended up hitting it. I can just say this to your listeners. If you go to theuntoldstory.net, the Untold Story, one word, theuntoldstory.net. Wait for it to redirect, and it will take you to the landing page, and you'll see the cover, you'll see the description, and get on my email list. I write a fresh article every Thursday, and you will get updates on the book. And when it comes out, you'll be the first to know. And I'm excited about it. It's in the editing cycle right now, but it did take me a long time to write. I would say it took 3 full years almost every day working on this book. It
My
was
goodness.
not easy to write. So, and we're still editing it. So we're not yet free of it, but God willing, that'll come soon.
Well, I'm looking forward to digging into it once you get it out published. Having so many, I want to say, prolific projects, uh, could you please share with us what you do to stir your creativity for writing and creating those projects?
Well, it's a big question, and there's a lot to it. And again, I will just reference for those who are interested. If you go to prolific course, one word, prolificcourse.com, that will take you to the prolific page. And it's a course, you take it your own pace, you have it for life, that explains my creativity process, goal setting, how I find my mission, how you can find your own mission, how to be insanely productive, etc., all out of my own experience. But here are a few things. I look for inspiration in just about everything.
Mm.
It's really a matter of paying attention. So what stirs my creativity is if I listen to music and
Mhm.
I pay attention. to the sounds and the lyrics. If I watch a film, but I don't just watch it for entertainment, I'm watching it to pay attention to things that I may see whereby I make connections. So some of my messages, some of my best messages have come from one scene in a movie, and it just triggered this entire message that I've, given in a conference, and people were impacted. Um, I will listen to podcasts that are not in my field, they're outside my field. Now,
Yeah.
my field is, you know, anything that's, Christian, that's kind of out of the ordinary Christian. And theology, the spiritual walk, that's my field. But to stir creativity, I will listen to podcasts that are outside of that. I might listen to a podcast on science.
Mm.
I might listen to a podcast on politics. I might listen to a podcast on psychology, or the brain, neurons, and how that all works,
Mhm.
personality disorders. I might listen to a podcast on health. I might listen to a podcast on business. It's outside my field, but I'm able to listen. And in the case of movies and television shows, I'm able to look whereby I'm seeking to connect dots. And
Right.
that's a lot of what creativity is. You're connecting dots, often from uncommon places. So those are things. A lot of times I'll have a conversation with a friend, which will spark creativity. I just spent 3 days with a lead pastor from Pennsylvania, and in 3 days, we recorded 9 episodes for the
Mm.
Insurgence podcast, which we talked about the Insurgence podcast, 9 episodes. And then we recorded 3 long episodes where we answered questions about church and ministry. And those, by the time people are listening to this episode on the Christ is All podcast, those would have already been released. So let's see, 9, 10, 11. We recorded 12 episodes.
Wow.
Some of them were an hour long, some of them were longer than an hour, in a space of 3 days. And it wasn't 3 full days either. But you can be very productive if you're inspired and you're motivated, and you make the decision that even if you don't feel inspired, you're going to be inspired for those 3 days.
Right. Yeah, I think with myself, uh, being able to remove distraction and work with your priority is
Mhm.
really it's a challenge.
Mhm.
I mean, especially with social media and all the access that we have to everything just right in the palm of our hand with our cell phones. And
Mhm.
I, I I'm really uh, encouraged to see the amount of project of the amount, or the what's the best way to say it, the continual contributing to the message that you're able to do with your creativity. And so I'm writing down all the different books and things I need to look up that I have let pass me by. And I tell you, one of the things that I've noticed about myself is you read a book, and it may have been years later, but then you go through so many life changes, it's time to go back and revisit that too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Amen to
so
that, brother.
I've done that with some of your podcasts. I've listened to them, and I think I need to go back and listen to it. I think a lot of it has to do with how mindful we are when we're like you were talking about music, watching a movie, not just for entertainment. I have a tendency to step back when I
Mhm.
am being mindful. Sometimes I'm just being entertained, but when I am being mindful and I can see the bigger picture of what's going on, and
Mhm.
like you said, it could be one scene out of a movie that really speaks to your life as well, and just kind of I have the Lord will speak different things to me that are kind of like puzzle pieces, and that one scene might be the very thing that brings
Mhm.
all that puzzle together with the missing piece. So
Mhm.
I really
Mhm.
appreciate you being here with me today, and sharing all that you did. and or all that you and all that you're working on. It's just tremendous. And so I appreciate it so much. I am so I'm just grateful, I guess, is one of the words that I could share. So for those of you listening, again, all of Frank's resources can be found on his website at frankviola.org. And you can get started by signing up for his weekly unfiltered email and diving into his podcasts.
Mhm.
So, have you got any last words you'd like to share with us before we jump off of here?
No, it was a privilege, and boy, we covered a lot of ground.
We did.
So when I replay this on the Christ is All podcast, I'll probably will be breaking it up into at least two different episodes. But
Awesome.
it was great. The questions were great. The way you asked them, excellent, and your feedback and responses were superb. So yeah, it was a privilege to be on, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Frank. Well, my friends, that wraps up this podcast. I look forward to sharing inspiring insight with you again in the next episode. So, like, subscribe, and share with all your friends, and we'll talk to you again soon. God bless. Bye bye.